Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar all around migrating your data to SharePoint Online, part of the Combined Knowledge and AvePoint What's New in Office 365 and SharePoint series. So just want to give you a quick introduction of what we're going to be covering today. So during today's webinar, we're really going to cover three main topics. First one, going to discuss some of the challenges of migrating to SharePoint Online. We're then going to provide our recommended four-step approach based on mine, Anand's, and AvePoint's experience. And then finally, we're going to share some customer stories with you at the end, and also really a chance to answer your questions that you've got. So within the webinar, you should see a question and answer box on the right-hand side. Please feel free to drop questions in there as we go, and we'll make sure we pick them up either now or at the end of the webinar. Just to make sure that everyone can hear me, if you can hear me okay, maybe just in the questions, if someone can just drop in that you can hear me, that'll be great, so I know that I'm not talking to myself this afternoon. It'd be great to know that I've got an audience of people out there that we're talking to. So just a very couple of questions, and thanks very much there for people confirming that you can hear me okay. That's great. Cheers, guys. So quick introduction. My name is Richard Barrett. I am a senior technical solutions professional here at AvePoint in the UK. My contact details are up on the screen there. I'm going to be leading the webinar today, but very pleased to be joined by my colleague Anand.
Thanks a lot, Rich. Yeah, my name is Anand Jaju, a technical solutions professional within Richard's team as well in AvePoint UK. Unfortunately, I don't have a Twitter handle, but I guess I'll be working on that for the next one.
Cheers, Anand. Yeah, and our contact details are up on the screen there. So by all means, if you think of any questions after the webinar that you don't get a chance, or maybe if the answer you weren't quite sure on, or you got any follow-ups, feel free to drop us an email, drop us a call, or drop us a message in any way you want. So. Really, just before we get into this, I want to do just literally two slides on who AvePoint are for maybe those of you who haven't heard of us before, and also explain why I feel that we can give guidance in this migration area to SharePoint Online. So AvePoint, we are the Microsoft Cloud expert. We have been around since the early incarnations of SharePoint, when it was known as Project Tahoe, so way back when, and we've been working with SharePoint all of that time. We've won various awards over the years. I should actually update my slide now. We've actually got a 2017 Global Partner of the Year award winner as well. So that's 4 years on the trot that we've won a global award from Microsoft. And what do we at AvePoint help people with? Well, really, we help people with three things. Migration, moving data from one system into another system. And that's really where we're going to focus today. Today's webinar is really all around how to migrate up to SharePoint Online and Office 365. But we also help customers with managing their SharePoint farms. I see some of the attendees here today. I'm aware that have some of our products around management, so permissions management, user management, governance, etc. And finally, we have a whole protection play, so helping you protect your farm, helping you make sure that the right people have access to the right data, make sure that the data doesn't leak outside your organization, making sure that if you've got sensitive data, it's stored in the right places with the correct controls. There's a little overview of who AvePoint are, but I think really. Today it's not about AvePoint, it's about us sharing, myself and Anand, some of our knowledge of how you can successfully kind of move to SharePoint Online. And I also want to be clear that I'm going to be very careful today that this isn't a pitch for AvePoint migration tools. I'm sure many of you guys on the line are aware that we have some tools. But I'm going to try and give you really practical and tangible advice that hopefully you can use whatever your migration method is. And I'm going to point out some free tools from other people, etc. as well. Okay. So first of all, I thought before we get into our four-step approach, I'd go over maybe what some of the challenges are, because there's a reason we have a specific approach. It's because unfortunately these migrations are not always the easiest in the world. So we've kind of thought about all the customers that we've worked with over many years and kind of considered some of the challenges that they say. So we'll have a little chat through some of these, and I'll get Anand to share some of his experience as well. So probably the biggest one that comes up to me is customers saying to me, hey, do I need to migrate everything? That's a pretty standard starting point. I've got this on-premise system, old version of SharePoint, another ECM system, Lotus Notes, Live Link, file shares, whatever it is. Do I need to migrate it all to Office 365? I would always kind of go back and go, well, actually, that's really a business decision, but at least we can help you with, once you've made that business decision, highlighting what does need to go and what doesn't need to go. So that's one of the things that people typically start with. Another one that comes up is kind of lack of migration experience. People come to us and say, hey, I haven't done a migration to Office 365 before, and my team don't have those skills. Anna, I don't know if you want to add anything on that point in particular.
Yeah, I mean, cutting down on the amount of content that needs to go up and doesn't is a huge kind of conversation that we have all the time. And as you're going to obviously go into further detail, this comes in a staged approach, and but yeah, I mean, these are some really really good points.
Yeah, and another great one. I can see that there's a question already come in kind of similar to this, which we'll pick up in detail later, but kind of SharePoint customizations. There'll probably be things that you've done to your current platform, be it SharePoint or another platform, that aren't compatible with Office 365. Maybe you deployed a farm solution because that was the thing to do back in the day. Or maybe you've got Lotus Notes and you've built some really complicated business processes. So how do I know about those customizations, and how do I move them up? That's a typical one we get as well.
Absolutely. I mean, migrations are inherently, and I hate to use this word, but painful experiences. They can be painful experiences. So, and because of the size of them, many people don't even know where to begin. So hopefully, we can provide that insight into where to start. At least you'll then have an idea of where to begin. Once you get that going, then you'll see that, momentum builds up, traction builds up in that scenario.
Absolutely. I mean, the next one is kind of data classification and GDPR. So, I've been working in the kind of SharePoint migration space for some time now. And, maybe a few years ago, people were saying to me, hey, Rich, I'm not going to go to the cloud because, I'm a government department. I don't want to put my data there. I mean, I say that conversation has kind of shifted now. And I think a lot more organizations are kind of happy with it. And the conversation now is more, do you know what? I'm going to move my data up there. But this GDPR thing is coming down the road. And I'm really worried about, putting personal data. I mean, irrespective of the fact I'm doing a migration, I'm worried about holding personal data, not in the correct manner. I've heard about these potential 4% of global turnover fines with GDPR, and I want to make sure as part of my migration, I sort of classify my data a bit better and kind of think about GDPR. So again, we'll touch on some of that today, and I'll try and point out some additional kind of GDPR resources that we have at AvePoint as well. Various content sources. I kind of think we've kind of touched on this. If I asked you all on the phone who's migrating or who's thinking of migrating from one platform into SharePoint Online, I'd pretty much say that the answer would be none of you. The vast majority of you have probably got, hey, I've got SharePoint 2003, maybe still. I've got file shares. I've got Lotus Notes. I bought Huddle back in the day. Maybe I'm on Google Docs. There's all kinds of different things. So, think about all those different sources. And probably the other one, and kind of the first question that someone normally asks me when I start talking about migration is, hey, I've heard about this Office 365 throttling limit. I've heard that Microsoft limit how much data I can push into the SharePoint Online service. I'm really worried about this. And generally, kind of, I would kind of not flick the question back, but I kind of start from a position of, well, what speed do we actually need? How quickly do we need to get this data in? There's loads of options now, and millions and millions of people have now moved up to Office 365, and we know how to improve performance. We've got things like the high-speed migration API from Microsoft that I can talk about. We've got ways to sort of scale out the number of technical sort of user accounts for the migration, all sorts of options, but I would always flick it back to say, what is the business need for speed? Once we know that business need, let's work out how technically we can meet that. If we can't meet that, let's think of a way around that. Rather than saying, hey, we can migrate at X gigabytes, an hour to Office 365.
And that ties in quite well with the scope of the work as well. I mean, many people are concerned about how long a particular migration can take without really understanding what needs to go up. Once that scope is defined, then it does become clearer how quickly the migration needs to happen.
Cool. And maybe just want to throw up a little kind of a little injection here about a survey that we're currently running. So AvePoint, in association with Hunt & Williams and the Center for Information Policy Leadership, we carried out a global survey last year of organizations to try and understand about their readiness for GDPR. And we're actually rerunning that survey. I think it launches later this afternoon. It's literally that soon that it launches. So we'll make sure we kind of share the link following this for you guys to participate if you want. It's really just a way of kind of understanding where the industry is and kind of where people are around GDPR. And certainly, some of my colleagues have written a lot of collateral around this. We host a lot of information on our website under the URL of avepoint.com/GDPR. We've got some sort of white papers, etc. And this survey is really good for sort of understanding where other organizations are. And maybe, you can then picture where you are as an organization and say, hey, do you know what? We're doing well. We're at about the same sort of stage of every other organization. And yeah, I wanted to sort of drop that in here. It's kind of related. It's not obviously truly a part of the migration, but it kind of seems sensible. And we'll make sure that we drop a link out to all you guys afterwards. And if you'd like to respond to that survey, ourselves and Hunter Williams and Sippel would really appreciate that. So, just taking it forward a step, I don't want to spend too long on the challenges. I want to get into, our approach. But I think what I wanted to just kind of show is that, you're not facing this alone. So we actually did a survey. This wasn't the GDPR survey, but an AvePoint survey. And, there's some stats here, 28% of organizations still have large SharePoint 2010 investments. That doesn't surprise me. And these numbers were global. This is not UK. 37% are going to go to an on-premise SharePoint 2016 within the next year. 34% were kind of migrating Office 365. But obviously, the challenge with both of those second tools is there is no direct migration path from either SharePoint 2010 to 2016 or from SharePoint 2010 to Office 365. There's no option for Microsoft to just press upgrade or just press migrate. So that's kind of where this kind of journey comes in today. And I've put one more slide on this introduction where I just looked at the stats kind of based on our respondents about kind of where people were using on-premise versions of SharePoint. And I think this probably ties in with kind of what I'm seeing in the market and speaking to customers. The SharePoint 2003 might surprise people, but it's still out there, and we still have people contacting us about that. And if you are on that platform, we can help you, and there's lots of people out there, so feel free to give us a shout. So I think that's probably quite a good introduction, just discussing kind of what some of the challenges are that we typically see. Hopefully those challenges relate to what you guys are seeing in your organizations. But what I really want to kind of move on to now is considering some practical advice that you can take away. And as I say, AvePoint, we have a migration product ourselves. We've been involved in lots of migrations. Myself and Anand, both at AvePoint and before we worked for AvePoint, have both been involved in migration. So really, this next bit is kind of our advice for a successful migration, irrespective of the migration tool that you use. And we've kind of tried to make it into 4 steps, so it's really tangible and really kind of usable for you guys. So typically, when I see a migration go wrong, or if a customer calls me and say, hey, I've tried to migrate and it's not been successful, it's because they've just jumped into migrating data. And I'm sure the fact that you guys are all on this call today and kind of want to hear about kind of a 4-step approach is probably because you're not in that you're not in that position. But the amount of people who they'll buy a migration tool from a vendor, that they'll point it and they'll start throwing data in without considering kind of the first piece. That's typically why things go wrong, because then users say, but that's old, I don't use that, the permissions are wrong, these people have left. Why did you migrate that site? We sold that part of the business 4 years ago. You get the story. So we think you need to work through this kind of 4-step approach. Starting off with discovery. Discovery is really about understanding what it is I have. The amount of times I'll speak to a customer and the customer will say, I know exactly what I've got on my source, on my SharePoint 2007, or maybe on my Lotus Notes or my Documentum system. And they'll say, yeah, I've got it. I absolutely know what's there. I'll say, okay, it's great. And then we'll do a bit of discovery to understand how many files they've got, what customizations they've done, and it will probably be wildly different. So number one, let's work out what it is you've got. And I'm going to show you some tools, some AvePoint tools and some non-AvePoint tools to help with that kind of later on. The second piece then is really kind of assessing and classifying. So once you've worked out what you've got, we can then start to answer that question of, do I need to migrate it all? We can't do that until we understand what we have. And some of the typical things customers say, there's a great customer of ours, a case study of ours, where the customer said, you know what, they were using SharePoint 2007, really, really, really heavy user of calendars. And they pretty much ran their business off SharePoint calendars for rotoring. And they kind of decided as part of the migration, do you know what, there's absolutely no point in me migrating calendar entries that are more than 3 years old. Like, these people have left the business, we shouldn't be holding that data. We do not want to go back over that. So they just basically, once they did their discovery, they then kind of made that assessment, and that allowed them to sort of cut that piece out. So yeah, this really is about understanding what it is you've got. And again, we'll give you some practical examples of how to do that during the session today. Then really it's kind of planning your migration. And sometimes people kind of, again, miss this step out and go, well, I'll do it all as a big bang. I'll stop everyone working, I'll migrate it over, and I'll use the new system. Might be the right approach. Or they'll say to me, hey, do you know what, Rich, I'm going to kind of migrate everything over. I'm going to give the business 6 weeks to check it. I'm going to bring incrementals over during those 6 weeks, and then I'll cut everyone over. Again, that might be the right approach, but it's not the only approach. And you probably want to use a combination. So let's work that out. And again, we'll give you some examples of that as we go through. And then finally, migrating the data. So only once we've worked out what it is we've got, we've done some assessment and classification, we've considered the sort of migration strategy we want, we can then migrate the data. And again, lots of different tools, and I'm going to point out some different ways to migrate data today. I'll mention our migration tool, but there's a few others on the market as well. So 4-step approach. If you move into Office 365, I kind of recommend you follow. And you know what? If you're moving to SharePoint 2016 on premise, it's the same approach. There'll be some different constraints, but you should still follow these 4 steps. So let's jump into discovery, and we'll talk a little bit about this. So I kind of personally like to break discovery into 2 main chunks, kind of like file level analysis. So this will kind of like be, saying how many documents have I got? How many MP3 files have I got? How many docs have I got? How many of those files can I just say are redundant by looking at them? A great example is go to an organization, there's documents on the file share that no one in the business has access to. To me, that's a perfect example of a document you probably don't want to migrate. Equally, another great example is I'm going to migrate all my file shares. Okay, cool. What about things like PST files? Do you really want to be putting PST files up there in Office 365? Probably not, so let's drop those ones out. So that's kind of what I call by file level analysis. There's also customization level analysis, and this is kind of more related to kind of ECM platforms. So, if you've got SharePoint, or you've got Notes or Documentum, it doesn't matter so much to a file share, but basically, what have you done to that product? How have you configured it, or how have you sort of developed it? And without kind of being rude, what development tax are you now going to have to pay as part of your migration? What have you done that you're going to have to rebuild? Branding is a great example. I've seen some beautifully branded kind of SharePoint 2007 and 2010 sites. I'll be honest, I've seen some not so beautiful ones, but still, what are we going to do about that branding? The organization's spent a lot of money and time and effort on that, but how are we going to sort of pull that across? Looking at who owns files, who can read it, who can edit it. So this is like some of the kind of initial discovery that we can do. And what we'll do now is we'll flick over and I'll kind of show you a couple of examples of this. Maybe I'll take the first one and then Anand can give some views on the second one. So let me just change my screen. Oops.
That's fine. While Rich is doing that, talking on that customization piece, an example did just pop into my mind where we were working we were kind of working with a fairly large organization, which had lots and lots of different business divisions, and initially they each had their own SharePoint environment, and then at some point they decided to consolidate. Now, because at some point those divisions had their own environments, they made their own business decisions and decided to buy their own third-party tools that basically did the same thing, but were from different vendors. When that consolidation piece then came into play, then content was no longer the only kind of thing that people had to think about. We all had to also consider, okay, is there kind of a duplication of work happening? Is there anything that we can kind of consolidate with one vendor, and in doing so, saving a lot of cost as well. So depending on the size of organization that you are, these are some of the things to consider as well.
Yeah, cheers, Anne. So this example here I want to point out is something called the SharePoint 2013 Migration Assessment Tool. This is provided absolutely free of charge by Microsoft. And the idea here is if you've got a SharePoint 2013 farm and you're thinking of moving to SharePoint Online, it can scan through your farm and kind of produce some output for you to help you kind of view the impacts and kind of what steps you're going to need to take and what remediation for going up to SharePoint Online. So free tool, made available by Microsoft. We'll make sure that I'll tweet the link out later, and I'll also kind of make sure we kind of drop it as a follow-up. But if you're going from 2013 up to SharePoint Online, there's an absolutely kind of perfect kind of free tool for you to use. We also at AvePoint clearly have some discovery tools as well, and I'll just touch on kind of one of those for now. So we have a SharePoint discovery tool, and this can produce a lot of information. And I guess the main difference between our discovery tool and the discovery tool, the SMAT tool, is that we can run our discovery tool against 2003, 2007, 2010, 2013, 2016. We can even run our discovery tool against SharePoint Online in case you were doing an online to online migration. And this is kind of some of the output stuff here, and I don't know. I mean, the main page of this is kind of showing me my top of everything. So, which site collections have got the most kind of solutions activated? Which site collections use the most custom master pages? Which site collections have the most lists in them? Which site collections have the most subsites? So really easily by looking at this, I can look at this and I can go, oh wow, so my root site collection's got 2 subsites. Yeah, there's nothing there that kind of worries me too much. It's quite a small farm, but why on earth have I got 307 different solutions? Like I want to start kind of looking at that. So this kind of gives me a top level, but then there's some additional pieces along the bottom. And I don't know, Anand, if there's any particular bits that you want to call out.
Yeah, there is one which I have this great, well, I mean, at the time, maybe it's one of those you had to be there stories, but we have a workflow information over here. And we ran this tool against a customer's existing 2007 environment. They had a whole farm and everything was fine, but the main business use for the entire platform was to use one list and to use about 5 different workflows. In 2010, they did a full redesign of those workflows, and they recreated them, they consolidated them, they put a lot of work into it, and that was fine. They ran with that for the next, I guess 7 years, and then earlier on this year, they ran this discovery tool, and it turned out that all of the work they put into recreating those workflows basically amounted to nothing, because it turned out that the business was still using the old workflows without them realize. So all of a sudden, they saw all of these instances of these really old workflows that were still in progress, and they just didn't realize it. And all of a sudden, they had to think, okay, now let's just see how we're going to kind of consider this in an online environment, which is where they were kind of going to.
And a pretty important one, thinking about kind of workflows actually, as well as that. From a technical point of view, there is a constraint here. So there is no, luckily I have 3 workflows in this farm, and I have got no running instances of any of those workflows. In other words, none of those workflows are actually in progress anywhere. So if you're migrating to SharePoint Online, there is no supported way to migrate a workflow. And let's say the workflow's at stage 2. And stage 2 is get approval from marketing or something like that. And let's say marketing haven't pressed the approval button. You know what it's like. We're always waiting on certain departments. What we can make sure there is it's not possible for me to migrate that workflow and it to be at stage 2. I can migrate the workflow, but it's not going to be at stage 2. So this is really good, because when it comes to my scheduling, and I mentioned this whole big bang, or whether we wanted to do a more kind of like gradual and schedule, is what I can do is I can go, do you know what? That department's got a lot of running instances of their workflow. Let's go and give them a heads up and say, hey, we want to migrate you guys. We're going to do it really quick for you, but maybe we need you not to create any workflows or have any running for like 2 or 3 days. So this is, again, where there's some really tangible information there that can help not only with a technical viewpoint, but from a kind of a business kind of scheduling viewpoint as well. There's lots of other things in here, like URL length. So there's some great news that URLs in SharePoint Online now can, I think, up to 400 characters. That they changed it, but still, if you've got a folder structure on a file share, people tend to put folders in folders in folders. Luckily I work for a SharePoint company. We don't use file shares, but you go to businesses and it's like finance department 2017 Q1 January quotes. Invoices that I have not reconciled, and then in there's like invoice from company ABCDY. All of a sudden, the URL length for that's at 600-700
and then the file name has all of that information as well. So
we need to know where we've got long URLs so we can fix things. But this is kind of some of the information, and this is our AvePoint discovery tool. So there are other ways to do it, but I think it's always worth pointing this out. So just to recap, kind of what I showed you there, I've kind of shown you the output from the AvePoint discovery tool. I didn't show that tool being ran. That's a tool that we kind of make available to customers who are using our migration software, and you can download a trial of that on our website, and we'll share a link. The other tool, I didn't show the output for this tool. This is the SharePoint Migration Assessment tool. This is provided from Microsoft on this particular link here. This gives a similar sort of output to the AvePoint tool, but only for SharePoint 2013. We'll make sure we kind of share both these links with you guys later on. Mm-hmm. Cool. So I'm going to jump back to the slides now. Fantastic. So let's just jump forward. So we're talking about a bit of discovering data. The whole point here is understanding kind of what I've got. We can then get into kind of assessment and classification. So now we're talking about duplicate files. Big SharePoint 2007 farm. How many files are you going to have that are identical? And I don't mean files that are called the same thing. I mean files that if I open them have the same content in. A migration is a good opportunity to try and tackle that problem. Are we going to remove every duplicate file? Possibly not. But can we try and remove a lot of them? Absolutely. Access age, permissions, etc. Again, if in the source system something's not been opened for 10 years, we probably don't need that. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know, but I'd want to look into that. And then getting into things like GDPR and personal identifiable information. You might want to use this as an opportunity to look where you've got personal identifiable information and maybe kind of just do something about that. Go, actually, maybe I just want to tag that differently. I want to apply a policy to that. Maybe I want to apply some rights management service in Office 365. Maybe I want to make sure it goes in a certain part. Maybe I don't want it to be in users OneDrive. So who knows? Whatever your business requirements, we can help understand where that is. And it might well be. I was working with a customer who said, you know what? They were splitting their business in 2. So one organization was being broken into 2. And as part of their migration, they had one source and 2 destinations. They needed to look at the source and basically work out if every file belonged to part of the business 1 or part of the business 2. So again, there's some tooling out there where you can build some models and help classify files and kind of push it into different places. So assessment classification and kind of how far you go with this is where there's a kind of a bit of leeway. I strongly recommend you look at duplicate files, strongly recommend you look at the age of files, permissions on files, looking inside the files. And I mean, the challenge of looking inside the files is kind of this, and this is how we position it, is that think about your business today. Let's say you've got 10 terabytes of unstructured data. Seems a reasonable number, maybe. Bit of data that you use, current project files, current project documents, things that people are working on day to day. Some data you need to keep, client records, employee records, personnel files, legal things. Maybe you have to keep financial documents for 7-8 years, something like that. There's then this, all the other stuff that's on the file share. Could be people's baby pictures, Christmas party menus, documents you shouldn't hold anymore, documents that part of the business you sold off. And again, this is where your risk comes in. And if I don't want to sort of bang on too much about kind of GDPR, because this is really a migration session, but if you've got loads of documents that have personal data about your customers in, that you have no reason to hold anymore, the fines from kind of May next year could increase dramatically. So this is kind of when we're talking about assessment classification, kind of what we're talking about, and we really bring it down to this slide here, which one of my colleagues put together, which I really like. Find out what it really is, not what it says it is. Find out a way to identify it. Maybe we can look for some keywords, do some machine learning, who knows. Protect what's important. Okay, so clearly some stuff we want to put some additional security controls on. Keep what's required. I'm not saying get rid of things for the sake of it, but get rid of what's unnecessary, right? The stuff that has no value, let's bin that stuff and kind of plan for the future. Users, more relevant, better search, less stuff to call through. Admins, the less stuff in the system, the easier to maintain. Kind of seems a fairly reasonable point. And from a compliance point of view, the less data we're holding, and the better that our structured data is, the less risk we have. So again, all of this really should hopefully reduce your costs and hopefully maybe increase your productivity. But it's definitely an area that people don't maybe do as much in. And Anand's kind of working actually with a customer at the moment. Maybe you can tell your story about the duplicate customer.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, there are two stories here, and I just thought of the second one. So we have a customer that's looking to kind of move online, and they do have a lot of kind of disparate content across SharePoint as well as file shares and a lot of unstructured data. Now, certain content can be made public and certain can't. And unfortunately, the way they had set it up, it's really they're really not sure what can and can't be made public. So the way we've kind of dealt with that is to use keywords within the actual documents. Luckily, they do have a classification within the headers and the footers of the documents. We're able to kind of read that. The second story that I had, which was kind of just maybe a little bit more lighthearted, is with duplicate data. So we're talking about reduced cost and increased productivity, which is great. So we had a customer that had a huge requirement for a migration, and I think it was 60 terabytes or just under 60 terabytes in file shares, which is huge. And when we did the initial file analysis, we found that about 20% of the content. About 35% of the content was duplicated. Out of that, the number one item that was duplicated the most was a PDF of the menu of the takeaway place next door. And this is, Richard mentioned, photos and all of this other stuff. You will be surprised, or maybe not surprised, at a lot of the duplicated data and how quickly, at least at the first pass of the source, that you can kind of start chipping away or removing what really isn't important. And as Richard mentioned, keeping what is and removing what isn't, like that.
And obviously, you want to keep one copy of the takeaway menu because that is important. It's just not lots of copies. So
that's a good point.
So I'm just going to jump over to show something else now. So again, there's various tooling that you can use this, and I want to kind of show a piece of AvePoint tooling that we can use in this area just here. So I need to just load up the screen. Apologies, I've closed that. Let me load it up. So we have a piece of technology called our Compliance Guardian product, and this is a product that can really help me sort of scan and kind of understand data across many.
Yeah, sorry.
Sources.
Yeah, sorry. So the Compliance Guardian, as Richard mentioned, you can scan, and it's not just about scanning and kind of finding things. It's about doing things with it, and deleting the content, whatever it might be. Now, what Richard is showing us over here is actually a really, really great way of getting a high level of where these violations might be.
Yeah, so it's a great. Cheers, Alan. So customers often say to us, "Do you know what, Rich? I don't want to move kind of personal data." Awesome. I don't think I've got any personal data in SharePoint. I think it's all on the file system. Okay, cool. So we can run some checks to open those documents up with our tooling, kind of look for personal data. And then this is giving me kind of a heat map and showing me my biggest issues in Exchange Online. Well, I mean, I've already migrated, so I can't do much about that maybe now, but I want to take some action later. File system's not that bad, but actually kind of SharePoint, my SharePoint 2013 platform's got a lot of violated data in. So I can click on that. Okay, I've only got one farm, so that's okay. I've only got one kind of web app here, and then I can now break into different site collections and go, oh, wow, the HR site, okay, accounting, secure. So this is now kind of giving me kind of a visual view to explore that, because often the challenge with doing sort of data analysis is that you can show too much data to people, and if I give it to people in a massive Excel and say, please read this, it's not going to happen. This is a kind of a more visual way of kind of viewing some of that information. But I think, trying to kind of show an example of kind of one of the tools that's available in the marketplace that can really help you understand what's in files if you want to go down that route.
Absolutely. And I mean, an HR site will definitely have personal information, which is fine. But then the idea is to find sources where this is unexpected, because it could be that one violation that could kind of get you. And once again, this is a migration webinar, but still talking on the GDPR aspect of it.
I don't know what that site is. Why has that got a violation in, for example? Exactly. Anyways, let's jump back. So that's kind of where the assessment piece comes in. And we've kind of given you an example of some of the tools there. So the idea now is we're at the stage where we have looked at what we've got. We've done some assessments. Maybe we've made some rules. Maybe we've said, let's use that example. We're going to delete all calendar appointments that are more than 3 years old in SharePoint. We've looked at where we've got some customizations. Maybe we had a custom master page that we built on SharePoint 2007, and we've decided, what, we're going to rebuild that or rebuild it slightly differently in the new platform. We can now kind of think about our Office 365 design, and it's not as simple as just having a SharePoint site. Office 365, put stuff in people's OneDrive for Business, putting stuff into classic SharePoint sites. What about the new SharePoint communication sites? We want to use some of those. Maybe we want to use Office 365 groups. We want to use Microsoft Teams. We've got to think about where all of this fits best. So think about your Office 365 design at this stage. Once you understand the data you're bringing in, not kind of before would be my advice. Migration methods. We kind of discussed this a little bit more, but let me just pop another slide up. There's really a couple of different methods, right? From a kind of lift and shift. You know what? You tell the business, on Friday, you've got to stop using the old system. We're going to move it over. Next Wednesday, it'll all be in the new system. Go for it. That's an option. To a more managed option where you almost like ask the business, hey, can I move this file? Yeah. Is it good? Yeah. Right, I'll move the next file. Is it good? Yeah. And both of those absolutely have value. But you really think about the best one for the best parts of your organization. So if you've got like some content that's very rarely accessed, do you know what? We could probably maybe use lift and shift. We've got areas that are being heavily accessed. We probably want to bring an incremental migration every evening, bring over the latest changes, etc., and kind of work on it from there. And typically, what we see most customers do is use a combination, different pieces for different areas. I'd be very surprised if an organization can picks one or the other, unless there's some really strong business requirements. I mean, there was a customer we worked with in Australia who had to migrate 40 terabytes of data up to SharePoint Online in a very, very quick time. I won't go into the details. There's some external factors as to why this was happening. Lift and shift was really the best approach. Big bang migrations of web apps was the way we went.
Yeah, as Richard mentioned, a lot of times this decision making can be driven by something else, whether it's a piece of hardware that's being decommissioned, whether it's an organization that's being acquired and they're shutting their doors at a particular time. So a lot of times the method in which the migration happens can be kind of forced upon you.
Cool. So I'm going to talk now about kind of migrating data, and I kind of put it into there's three main ways you can migrate data. Kind of manual or scripted migrations of some extent, like using a migration tool, a tooled approach, or kind of using some form of services where you basically pass the work off to someone else. I'm going to go through the pros and cons of each and give you some examples of each. Again, some AvePoint examples and some third-party examples as well. So let's take manual or scripted migrations. Benefit of this, let's just be honest, you probably won't need third-party consultants or products. If you're going maybe 2010 to 2013, not really what we're talking about today, maybe you can use a database attach from Microsoft. Maybe you get the users to copy and paste content. Kind of like sometimes people laugh at, when I sort of say users might copy and paste content, but you know what? For their OneDrive for Business from their home drives, that might be an appropriate one in some organizations. Maybe you can write some PowerShell scripts, against some APIs to do that. So, these are all kind of benefits of this approach. What I would say the negatives of this approach are, it's a lot harder to version hop, to go from, say, 2007 to SharePoint Online. Not impossible, it tends to be harder. metadata is often lost in this approach. So if you're getting copy and pasting, we're going to lose like the last access time, etc. Again, you need to consider that. Can be harder to do content cleansing and restructuring. Not impossible. And also, I'll be honest, it can end up consuming large amounts of internal resource. I've certainly worked on projects before I worked for AvePoint where we've tried to do migrations, ourselves with some scripting and options, and we've ended up spending a lot of time on that. So, manuals unscripted, there are options. If you're going one version to one version on premise, maybe you can use one of the Microsoft methods. Maybe you can use some copying and pasting. But we have to be aware. And when I speak to customers, I always point out that this is an option, and in certain scenarios, it might be perfectly valid. Kind of next main option will be kind of using a tooled approach. So probably the biggest example is it's been done before. Using a tool that's supported by a third party. You can typically do more interesting migration paths, like 2007 straight to SharePoint Online, or quicker to SharePoint Online, or Documentum to SharePoint Online. If any of you guys are still using things like Documentum, that certainly helps. Kind of full incremental and ad hoc migration is probably the best thing. Do a big migration, bring over changes every evening, just run a quick one-off. Kind of they're all available. So yeah, definitely kind of some of the benefits. Negatives, again, let's be honest, you're going to have an internal resource investment. Internal resources are going to need to learn how to use the migration tools that you pick. Or you're going to bring some people in. You have to do project management, you have to do scheduling, and kind of discussed at the start some of the challenges around, I don't have the skills in my team to do this. So yeah, tool migrations, there are, and unsurprisingly, I'm now going to just spend 2 seconds discussing our migration tool at AvePoint. So our migration tool at AvePoint can go from a wide range of sources right up to Office 365. So these 4 sources, so 8 sources rather, Documentum, eRooms, Exchange Public Folders, File Shares, LiveLink, Notes, Quicker, and SharePoint, right down to 2001, are all supported in our out-of-the-box migration products. We can also do some other sources, and typically, we do that having a conversation. Maybe we've done it for a customer, and we've got like a little add-in for the tool. But each of these 8 options, you can buy a migration tool, and you can go ahead and absolutely use these options today. Well, probably we're doing okay for time. We've not got loads of time, but I'll probably just give a very quick demo of how a migration tool works. Just give you a flavor if you haven't seen this before. So I'm just going to switch my screen back a second.
So Richard mentioned one of the kind of, I don't know, quote unquote negatives of using a tooled approach, and that is kind of having to bring up to speed resources on how to use a particular tool, because migrations tend to be iterative processes where you'd have like 1 wave, 2 waves. Initially you'd have a pilot, I guess, then 1 wave, 2 waves, etc. You find that the learning curve for a tool, whether that be ours or any others, is quite steep. So I mean, I'm not sure. In my personal experience, at least, I found that whenever I've run a migration with a tool, then it has been relatively easy to pick up. Maybe it's just me, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it is, Alan. So this is our migration tool. So this is a tool that you'd install. That's the right word. You would install in your environment, and you can see that these are the different sources that we support, out of the box. So let's just go and show you how a SharePoint migration works, just for for the purpose of this demo. As we can see, we can go 2007 right up to SharePoint Online. Just click the button here. And I'm going to go fairly quick. I want to give you a flavor. It's not meant to be a training session. And basically, it's really simple. I've got kind of like a left, which is my source. So I can now drill in. I can go and look at my source. Maybe I know that I want to migrate the accounting site collection in its entirety, but I don't want to bring across its security. Kind of seems a reasonable thing to do. I've decided that the security is terrible. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to start fresh with security. But actually for this demo, let's go a bit simpler. Let's just say actually I want to grab a document library, just migrate a specific document library. So a document library. It'll be called shared documents, won't it? Because it's 2007. Absolutely. That's just a little memory check for me there.
Yeah, it's been a while. And one of the other reasons that you might not want to take up security for 2007 is that it's classic as opposed to claims-based authentication. So.
Yeah, great point. So let's pick shared documents, and then I'm going to push those over to kind of SharePoint Online, and I'm connected to a number of SharePoint Online sites here. So basically, you can choose now kind of where I want those documents to go, and I've got a number of SharePoint tenants, and I'm going to throw it into a specific site collection, just here. So basically, I'm picking left, picking right of kind of where I want the data to go from and to. Then the next thing that I need to kind of specify is the settings, and the way that we do that, we have something called a profile. And the idea is I build my profile once, and then I kind of use it time and time again. I don't have to use it all of all of the time. So, one of the first things we can build is something called a filter policy. And this is pretty cool. This is where we can build those policies to say, hey, don't migrate calendar appointments that are more than 3 years old, or hey, don't migrate documents with this content type. Don't migrate files not modified for a certain time. So I can build these filter policies. Could choose over to bring alerts over. Kind of what am I doing with workflows? Am I bringing over the definitions? Am I bringing over the instances? It's all there. Manage metadata service. Okay, it's not relevant for a 2007 one. And this is probably my personal favorite button in the entire AvePoint migration tool product, right? If I untick this box, it will, every time it finds an empty list or library, it will not migrate it. So let's think you've been using SharePoint for many years. How many TMs have people created a team site and never used the calendar? Or created a project site and never used the announcements list, right? Let's just not bring them over. It's going to make it cleaner. Like if you don't do any cleanup other than that one button will mean you'll have a nicer looking SharePoint environment in the destination. So personally, love that option. So yeah, then we've got kind of mapping options. It's highly likely, as Alan said, that your users may be in different domains or using different authentication methods. So maybe I log into 2007 using something like AvePoint/RichB. But on Office 365, I'm going to be richard.barrett@avepoint.com. We can build like a domain mapping to basically find where it says AvePoint/RichB and replace it with richard.barrett@avepoint.com, keep on that version history kind of running nicely. And some other advanced options as well that in the interest of time, I'm going to skim through. So the idea of the tool is kind of pick it on the left, choose where it goes on the right, pick a profile, save it as a plan with a schedule, and you're good to go, and we'll push the data up.
Oh, my personal favorite in the tool is a user mapping for users that no longer exist, so you can actually have a placeholder for accounts for people that are no longer in the organization. So it makes it really easy to.
That's a handy one as well. And just a few reasons why people chose to use our tool. We wanted to clean up and restructure, which is not possible using an out-of-the-box approach. That kind of makes sense. We want to do housekeeping as part of the migration, another good reason to use a tool. We wanted to retain versioning, again, another good reason to use a tool. So just a few examples there. So that's kind of using a tool. The next one will be using some sort of migration services. So basically getting someone else to do your migration project for you. So the entire project's been run by people who've done it before. We can get rid of that sort of upskilling. Restructuring and cleansing can normally be included with a lot of these options. You can probably get a more accurate project plan that you can commit to the business and without being rude that you can hold someone else's neck against. Negatives of this, on paper, it can look like the largest investment. You are making a cost investment potentially. A third party might be looking at your data. Internal resources don't gain skills, but do you want to teach your internal resources how to migrate to Office 365? Hopefully you're only going to do it once. Some of the negatives. Now, what I thought I'd mention is a couple of the options here. So the first one I want to mention is something called FastTrack. So FastTrack is a set of services that Microsoft make available to sort of help you adopt Office 365. And if you've never looked at FastTrack before, there's there's all sorts of stuff up there, from collateral, from kind of plans. One of my favorite things is something called the productivity library. So you go to the productivity library and say, hey, I work in sales, and we've got Office 365, and it makes suggestions of how Office 365 can help the sales department. So if you're like a consultant or you're in the SharePoint team and you want to help sell the benefits of the new features to people in your business, check out the productivity library. Anyways, I digress. So FastTrack is a migration service. In terms of eligibility, right, and in terms of what is available, this changes all the time. So what I would recommend is there's a link there, which I'll share and tweet out afterwards, to the FastTrack data migration services of what's available. But today, I pulled this off literally before to make sure it was up to date. Microsoft will help you migrate file shares to SharePoint Online or Box to SharePoint Online. They'll help you migrate file shares, Google Drive, or Box to OneDrive for Business. So if one of those is your migration approach, I'd strongly recommend looking at FastTrack and see if it can help for you. FastTrack, there are some, it's kind of a service provided, so it has a service definition. You need to make sure the definition is going to work for you. Kind of restructuring is harder to do, but have a look. Is absolutely available, and if it works for you, potentially then you can use your budget in other areas. Another example would be kind of using someone like AvePoint. So as well as selling a migration tool, we actually have a kind of migration service offering where basically our consultants will do the migration using our tooling for you. But this is kind of provided as a sort of service engagement where we will agree to the outcome. So we're not selling you a tool. We're basically saying we will do that for you for this investment, and these are the services we'll offer. So again, a similar example, and I think we've got a customer story later on that we'll mention for this, but a similar example to FastTrack using a services approach. So quick recap on migration options. Manual, definitely an option. some sort of scripting approach, yeah, some sort of tool such as our Docker Migrator tool, or maybe migration services such as our AvePoint client services tool. These are really your main options. And I've tried there to kind of go for what I think the pros and cons are, rather than saying, hey, this is the one you should take, because do you know what? Different circumstances have different scenarios.
Absolutely. And I mean, the migration services on paper might look like the biggest investment. I mean, the way I look at it is it comes down to the amount of time that you could potentially spend on a migration, because that will end up meaning that the more money that's spent on any kind of migration anyway. So it's got to be a balance versus, we have done multiple migrations in a year. In your organization, hopefully this is a one-off. If it's to Office 365, then hopefully it's a one-off. So it's that experience as well that we could bring to the table.
Absolutely. So yeah, just to wrap up, kind of 4 steps. Well, not to wrap up this section. Discovery, understand what you've got, what you've done, what content's in the source, and also agree the scope. The amount of times I'll go to a customer and say, hey, you're doing a migration. What's in scope? SharePoint. Okay, cool. And I'll go back a few weeks later and they'll be like, oh, actually, now I've got to do Lotus Notes and file shares. Let's get that scope nailed at the start. And my tip on file shares, right? People often ask me the question. I don't know if the question's been asked today. I haven't checked all the questions yet. We will have time for questions later. But people say to me, do you think it's practical to have no file shares? I would say yes. Technically, we have no file shares at AvePoint. Is it practical in your organization? I would say if you have a senior buy-in to get rid of file shares, it's possible. If you don't have senior buy-in to get rid of file shares, I think as an IT or a SharePoint kind of consultant or expert, you're facing an uphill battle, if I'm being really honest with you. Assess and classify. So once we know what we've got, we can look at that. We can see, do we want to put sensitive data in? Do we not want to put sensitive data in? Can we get rid of duplicates? And again, we mentioned some of our AvePoint discovery tools. I also mentioned the Microsoft SMAT tool, the Shared Migration Assessment tool that's free and available for that. Then think about your plan and design. How's it going to look in SharePoint? What migration approach am I going to take? Am I going to do a big bang? Am I going to do incrementals? Am I going to do everyone together? We do one site collection at a time. And another thing actually at this stage, a top tip that I'd say is publish your entire migration plan at this stage, maybe like to the nearest month. So then you can tell, hey HR, we're doing your site collections in June. Because if that's their end of year, they can come back to you early and say, well, you can't do that. So rather than sort of surprising people, and some people say, well, don't plan it too far in advance in case you get it wrong. I would say check it out there, make it far in advance, and then you can get people ready and you can get that information early. And then finally, migrate data. And I've kind of mentioned a few of the techniques that a few of the options around migrating data that we have. But you're not quite finished yet. You've got to think about user adoption. Office 365 is an amazing system full of so many different ways to do things. But if your users are used to using a file share, just giving them Teams, how are they going to know what to do? How are we going to drive the adoption? So I wanted to pop this in. This is kind of nothing to do with AvePoint. I was at an event a few weeks back with Combined Knowledge, and this customer called Palladius was speaking. And Palladius, they make a lot of sort of food products that you guys may have heard of, things like Go Ahead biscuit bars, etc. They migrated from Google to Office 365, and they had the most perfect adoption story I've ever heard, involving digital ninjas in the business to do things. It was fascinating. So the link's there. If you're thinking about how you're going to get the system adopted, go and watch this video, and I'm sure you'll get some amazing ideas from those guys. So kind of not really part of today's, but I think it's important, so I wanted to throw it in. And I was blown away by what the guys did and how quickly they got Office 365 adopted across the organization. So kind of, we've got 10 minutes left, and we thought we'd do a couple of quick case studies from customers, and then I can see we've got a good number of questions which we'll try and work our way through. While we're doing these case studies, please drop any additional questions you have in, and we will try and answer them. So Alan, I don't know if you want to take the first case study, and I'll take the second one.
Yeah, sure. So Knowsley Council. This was a council that initially had a requirement to kind of move 2007 to 2013. And they had 1.5 terabytes of content. While having a conversation with them, we actually found that the reason they hadn't moved from 2007 was that they had initially done their 2003 migration, and that had been so burnt by that experience that they had put off any kind of 2007 migration right up until the point where they actually had to. And this is where they kind of approached a third party. They'd done the 2003 to 2007 themselves, and because of that experience, they then kind of come out and tried to find a third party to help them with that. They had 1.5 terabytes of content, 2,500 users across the platform as well. As a result of that, kind of on a side note, we also helped them with their backup and restore. So that protection piece that Richard talked on previously as well. One of the quotes that we have from there is shown on the screen. We can do some housekeeping during the migration process, allowing us to clean up any unwanted content instead of migrating everything. So the migration wasn't just, as Rich mentioned, the lift and shift of just kind of dumping everything in their 2013 environment. It was very much about taking the opportunity of the migration rather than as that being a burden, but taking it as an opportunity to restructure and to clean and to cleanse that data and content moving forward.
Cool, cheers, Alan. And I just want to go through one more example before we get into the questions. If I can get the screen to change. And the example that I'm going to go through here is a customer called National Records of Scotland that used our migration as a service. So they decided to take a service approach. They used our migration as a service. They basically had a couple of legacy data systems. The data was already kind of really well structured and metadata. If you think about what they do as an organisation, they're the National Records Body for Scotland. They're pretty good at metadata and tagging. They just wanted to move it, keep all the metadata, keep all the permission structure, and just basically, I want it done quickly. So they just came to us and said, hey, AvePoint, this is what we want to do. Can you do this work? And we kind of did that for them successfully, and hence there's a case study from them. So kind of slightly different example to the one that Anna mentioned, but I think it's kind of worth touching on as well. So we've got sort of 10 minutes left. I want to sort of answer some questions, and there's some great questions in the chat already that we'll try and go through. Now, the questions seem to be broken into sort of two areas. There's kind of like questions about AvePoint, and there's sort of technical questions about doing migrations. I'm going to try and do the sort of non-AvePoint questions first, if that's okay. So one of the first questions we had was, how does Office 365 handle, 2007 sites based on things like the site directory or the meeting workspace templates? Great question. So the simple answer is, let's take meeting workspace. Office 365 does not support the meeting workspace. So how does it handle it? It depends on your migration strategy. What we would try and do, and what we would recommend, is you map those meeting workspaces to something different. Maybe you build a site template that works for those users. Maybe you look at what they're using them for. I've seen meeting workspaces used in a lot of different ways. So maybe we kind of build a custom template we map to. Certainly, talking about the AvePoint migration tool, we can kind of map site template to site template as part of that. So let's say you've built a new template called the custom meeting template. We can kind of map all your meeting workspaces to that with our tool. Again, if you're not using our tool, you're going to have to do that yourself. Other things to consider are there better ways of doing that functionality? So rather than just migrating your meeting workspaces, like what was that giving the business? Again, as an example, we have an app in the SharePoint store called AvePoint Meetings, which kind of replicates the functionality. So maybe you could suggest a slightly different approach. But yeah, the simple answer is you're not going to be able to create a meeting workspace in Office 365. So we're going to map it to something. And that's where the assessment piece comes in, because again, the AvePoint Discovery tool, I believe the SMAT one does as well, but I'd have to double check. We'll kind of tell you where you're using templates that are not available in the destination. So hopefully that answers the question around that piece just there. Let me go through some other questions and see what we can take next. So there's a cool question here about InfoPath. This normally comes up. I've got a lot of InfoPath. What should I do? So as I think most people are aware, the future of InfoPath is going. It's
deprecated.
Yeah, there we go. It's supported, but it's going. So what I generally tell customers is, look, if the destination you're going to supports InfoPath and you can migrate your forms and they work, do that. Don't go making new InfoPath forms today. That seems like the wrong thing to do. You need to be looking at what you can be using instead. Flow, Power Apps are amazing. They might not quite have everything yet, but they're getting there. But again, that's part of where your discovery and assessment comes in. Have you got InfoPath? If you have got InfoPath, what are you doing? I mean, some people build some amazingly complicated things in InfoPath that probably shouldn't even be in Office 365. Maybe that should be a CRM system. But anyway, do the assessment, see where you've got it, and then kind of make a decision as to where you go with there. So there's a few questions around the AvePoint migration tool, around migrating from project server. So yeah, those people who want to migrate from project server, give us a shout. We can discuss our support for that. We do support a reasonable amount of project server going to online, but let's have a chat about your requirements and do that discovery piece.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So Richard showed us a list of kind of supported out of the box, and as you saw in the tool, there are a number of sources that we do support going up. That's not an exhaustive list. Many of those have actually come out of individual customer requirements. I don't think we used to do live link until we had one large customer say we need to do live link, and then we kind of built it out. So, but we're definitely open to have conversations around weird and wacky and wonderful sources that you might have in place, and if you are looking to move up to Office 365, how we could help with that.
Yeah, cool. A couple of questions about where you get some of these assessment tools from. So we'll kind of share this, and the guys from Combined Knowledge will kind of share out the video and the links. But so the Microsoft Shared Migration Assessment Tool and the AvePoint Discovery Tool, what I'll do is I will personally tweet those following this session. My Twitter is @Barrett_Rich. So if you want to grab those, feel free to do that. But we will also share the links to those afterwards, and we'll share the slides. So no worries around that. As a good question here saying, how are links handled in migrations? So again, if we're not using a migration tool, we need to think about links and kind of where navigation points to things that doesn't exist anymore. If you're using a migration tool, you want to speak to the vendor and see how much they support. So I know for AvePoint, we'll basically correct any sort of links in SharePoint. If documents refer to other documents, it needs to depend if it's relative or an absolute link. Again, there are ways even to fix absolute links and kind of remap them. One of the things that our migration tool does is create something we call a migration database. This is basically just a big table, and it kind of lists all of the things that you are migrating from. Sorry, the source to the destination, rather. So it was here, it's now here. You can then build all sorts of clever things off the back of that to do redirections, etc. One customer that I work with, they had a big challenge with people who were saying, do you know what, I'm concerned that users will go to the old locations. So they built something called Where is my document? It looked a bit like like Google, big search page, just a box in the middle. They just typed in where the document was. This web page they built just queried our migration database table, quick store procedure, found the file, and told them where it was now. So that's a great example of how we can handle things like this. But yeah, for us, we have this sort of migration database that kind of really helps in this place just here. And
something like that was a really innovative way to kind of feed back into the user adoption piece as well. It really helps people to kind of adopt the new system when they're able to kind of reference it to the old, because then it brings in context for them.
Cool. So I think we've probably got like 2 minutes left. What I think we'll do is there's a couple of questions that maybe we'll answer personally, but maybe just try and give our kind of final thoughts. So myself, my one bit of advice to you is if you're doing a migration is work out what the scope is, like which sources are in scope, and work out what is in those sources. And if someone tells you what is in the sources, don't trust them. Do that work yourself. That'd be my tip one. My second tip would be to make sure that you publish your sort of high-level migration plan early and get feedback from the business. I know that might set you up for failure is the risk, but I would say you can get input early on. So that would be my personal kind of 2 tips. And I don't know if you want to share like a
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that last tip was really great, and I think it feeds quite well into in my experience. I have found that business-driven migrations are more successful than IT-driven ones. That's my experience. But normally people are more likely to do what their boss or what their business head tells them to do, rather than what someone from IT tells them to do.
Yeah, and that ties into my point about file share migrations earlier. Don't do it unless you. And there's one more question that's just come in, which I am going to pull out actually before we finish, because it is a pretty cool question. So I think it's Brian's asking us, what if I've externalized content? Maybe I've got 2010, I put in an RBS technology. How do I migrate that to SharePoint Online? So again, Brian, I'm going to say it depends on your migration approach. I can speak for our migration tool. We can handle that, and we'll just basically restore the content back into the sort of Microsoft content databases that they hold for you. But yeah, if you've externalized content, that's definitely going to be a factor when you do your when you choose your tool or migration approach.
It might be a hybrid conversation.
Yeah, it can be a hybrid conversation. Let's keep some stuff on-prem.
Yeah.
Anyways, guys, personally, from myself, I want to thank you very much for your time, for joining us today. The recording and slides will be sent out by Combined Knowledge. On their website, there's a listing of all the recordings from this What's New in Office 365 series. I've been lucky enough to kind of present on 3 of them, and I've kind of really enjoyed it, and hope it's been helpful to you guys as well. Hopefully everyone has a great rest of the day. If there's any questions, mine and Anand's contact details are at the start of this deck. Thanks for your time, everyone.